Greetings. Now, most of the viewers of this channel do not follow my Twitter account, and you probably should not follow it because that is not nearly as refined a medium as YouTube and this YouTube channel. Twitter is a place where high-level conversations are extremely difficult because there's always anonymous commenters who drag everything down into the gutter. But one thing Twitter is useful for is polls if the poll is structured the right way. And I put a poll out to Twitter about the Federal Reserve, and of course monetary policy has to be viewed in the context of all central banks of the world. The US is not the only country in the world. But the question posed was, which council would do a better job of running Federal Reserve monetary decisions? And the two choices were 100 PhD economists or 100 small business owners. And as you can tell, the small business owners were the overwhelming winners. It appears that one PhD economist voted for himself. And the truth is, the U.S. Federal Reserve employs not 100, but 600 PhD economists. And as I've explained before on other videos, 600 PhD economists are no better than one PhD economist since they have all memorized the same outdated textbooks that are about 50 to 70 years behind the times. And therefore, one PhD economist is worse than having 0 PhD economists. So 600 is the same as 1, and 1 is worse than 0. Therefore, 600 is worse than 0. And the 100 small business owners would not need to be full-time because they're running their businesses. They would just have to vote once a week. They could attend the brief Zoom meeting once a week and then cast their vote. And these 100 small business owners would steer monetary policy decisions astronomically better than the PhD economists would. It's a travesty that we don't have this system today. In the future, it will seem obvious that this was the right result, but at the moment, no, we don't have monetary policy run by a vote of small business owners, which is what would make the most sense. Now, to give additional clarity about how clueless the Federal Reserve and the PhD economists running that are, to describe it another way, you would never go to a surgeon or even a dentist who had only read books about doing surgery or dentistry and never actually done any real work in that field. Yet we have a situation like that in our monetary decisions. We entrust monetary policy decisions to very theoretical people who have no real world experience at all. And the results are catastrophic, as we will soon see. This is something of great importance that is entrusted to people that are utterly unqualified for this task. And it's not that their IQ is low, not at all. They have PhDs in a quantitatively rigorous academic field. It's just that they're hyper-theoretical and they are not accustomed to any accountability, and their career advances by repeating the same old dogma. Remember that a PhD economist is happiest when in a room with 5 other PhD economists and they all recite the same things back to each other. That's when they are happiest. Now we'll go to another video clip that has been featured elsewhere on this channel that goes into more detail about why we are in the state that we are in. The Federal Reserve has raised the Fed funds rate another 0.75%, which is a huge hike. The last few hikes were also 0.75% each, and I'll show you how steep of a cumulative rise that has been and how misguided that is. Longtime viewers of this channel know that I advocate a Fed funds rate of 0% and continuous permanent quantitative easing because that is needed to offset technological deflation, and all data corroborates that as the accurate thesis. However, that is at odds with all the textbooks that PhD economists have memorized. These textbooks were written 50 to 70 years ago and take into account the Great Depression and other things like that. And that's why the Federal Reserve is always reactive, is always acting too late, and has a fundamental misconception about what the economics of technology and the 21st century in general really are. So this is from CNBC. The Federal Reserve approves a 0.75 point hike to take rates to highest since 2008 and hints at change in policy ahead. So let's scroll down to see the chart. This is the Fed funds rate target rate since July 2006. Now, if you recall, what they did is raise rates too much in 2004 through 2007, although still at a very slow rate. It took them a full 3 to 4 years to go from 1% up to 5.25%. And when the housing market started to crash, they cut rates very quickly, but they started 18 months too late. It took them 18 months to figure out what people in the real world were already experiencing. Then the 0% Fed funds rate was still not enough, so quantitative easing began as a way to simulate negative interest rates, and I'll talk about that. That kept going for a number of years, and then other countries also began to print money via quantitative easing, creating a worldwide exponentially rising pipe of QE, which I speak about in my monthly monetary creation reports. They tried one experiment of raising interest rates. Why? There was no evidence of inflation in 2016. They just thought that if unemployment becomes too low, that means too many people have jobs. That's the language they use. Too many people have jobs, and that's why inflation must be around the corner, even though there was no evidence of inflation. So they started edging up the interest rate, and that was already a disaster because they made the interest rate too high, so they were already lowering well before COVID. This is 2019. Then COVID forced them to lower it faster, but they were going to have to lower it to 0% anyway. 0% has to be permanent for reasons that I often speak about, and in fact, QE has to be on top of the 0% to simulate a negative interest rate. But now they are reacting to inflation. A, they shouldn't be reacting to it at all. It's very transitory. But B, even if they wanted to do something, why start too late? This is the steepest rise ever in the Fed funds rate. This is indicative of people who don't know what they're doing. How can any orderly, measured, well-planned strategy have an increase rate like this? This is very analogous to a novice day trader who overcompensates too late and goes too far. Anyone who has been a day trader can relate to what I'm saying. A novice will react too late and then go too far in the overcompensation of that strategy. And unfortunately, these PhD economists do not have the mindset of a hedge fund manager or a day trader, and therefore they are doing this without realizing how much trouble they're causing. No economy can function properly when you have this much of a swing in the Fed funds rate, which they shouldn't be doing, but even if this were the right thing to do, to have to increase it this quickly is indicative of reactiveness and really not knowing what is going on. This chart says it all. There are 600 PhDs at the Federal Reserve and a whole bunch of other PhD economists that work with the Federal Reserve. The entire profession is a complete failure based on this chart alone. How can any rise like this be justified? That means they are caught by surprise yet again. But also what they're doing is very wrong. It is going to tank the economy for sure. And to see why, we go to the next chart. Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. This is the Wu-Xia shadow federal funds rate. Longtime viewers of this channel know what this is about. So this is an attempt by two economists, Cynthia Wu and Fandora Xia, to combine quantitative easing and the Fed funds rate to create a composite of what the effective federal funds rate is at a given time, and thereby simulating negative interest rates. When the Fed funds rate is above zero, then the blue line and the purple line are in sync. But when the Fed funds rate is zero and quantitative easing is going on, because quantitative easing is only done when the Fed funds rate is already zero, then you see an approximation of a negative interest rate. It got as deep as minus 2.8%, minus 2.89% in 2014. Now this negative trend is very distinct, and it is indicative of technological deflation in the economy. The atom, the accelerating technomic medium of the world, generates an exponentially rising amount of technological deflation, which is evident from the downward trend in the Wu-Xia shadow rate, which by now, by late 2022, should be minus 3 or minus 4%. It should be over here. Instead, as we just saw, the Fed funds rate is close to plus 4%. So not only have they stopped quantitative easing and are reversing it, they also raised the Fed funds rate in a super fast way in an unusually short period of time. So instead of the minus 4% that they should be, they are at plus 4%. That is a gap of 8%. That is the type of situation that causes a breakage of the entire system. I'm not saying that a breakage is going to happen, but the sheer magnitude of incompetence and mismanagement from the Federal Reserve truly beggars the belief. The only good thing I can say about these PhD economists is at least they don't think deflation would be good. A lot of gold bugs and other such amateur people who are very misinformed seem to think deflation would be good. These PhD economists at least know that deflation is not good because there was deflation in the Great Depression. The Great Depression being almost a century ago, 90 years ago in fact, is long enough that textbooks that PhD economists memorize do in fact talk about the Great Depression. But the Wu-Xia shadow rate should be at minus 4% just based on the long-term trend line of this chart alone, and instead they have the Fed funds rate at plus 4%. That is a gigantic gap. Now, why is the Federal Reserve overreacting this much? This is where it gets even worse.